Good afternoon and welcome to 12 Point Center for Women and our webinar on preparing to age successfully. I'm here with Sarah Bork, and we're going to give this a minute just to let a couple of extra people who have signed up come into the webinar. So give us a minute and we'll get started shortly. So welcome to the 12 Point Center for Women, and our webinar today is about preparing to age successfully. My name is Deb Cartisser, and I'm a Senior Wealth Advisor here at 12 Points, and I'm joined by Sarah Bork. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're talking about today and then introduce Sarah and get started. So really, this webinar is talking about aging successfully. It's about so much more than healthcare or finances. It's really about creating a life that preserves dignity, independence, connection, purpose, and quality of life through every chapter of aging. And there's more than just you're suddenly old. In this conversation, Sarah and I are going to explore the practical and emotional aspects of planning well, both for aging parents and for ourselves, including how to recognize when more support is needed, how to prepare for changing health needs, and really how thoughtful planning can create greater confidence and peace of mind. So, whether you're helping someone you love or beginning to think about your own future, this discussion is designed to provide guidance, clarity, and actionable steps. So, I'm going to stop my screen share here and introduce Sarah. Sarah, I'd love to hear about what an aging life care specialist does and really understanding how you help families.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So, aging life care professional, probably many people haven't heard of us. I hadn't heard of us until 8 years ago when I ran into the profession and joined it and have loved it. We serve as coaches and guides and educators and advocates for people as they are aging. Um, a lot of us have been working in the aging space, working with people who are aging in healthcare for a long time. We're nurses, PTs, OTs, social workers who have a lot of experience in the resources that are available in health trajectory and different illnesses and illness prevention and management. And we really help people identify what they would like their life to look like and help them get there to the best of our and their ability.
That's great. Oh, one thing I just wanted to add is the chat is disabled on this webinar, and under at the bottom of the ribbon across the bottom, you have a more button with a circle. When you click that, there's a Q&A box, and please don't hesitate to ask your questions as we go along, and I can work them into our conversation with Sarah and make sure she sees those things. So talk about some family situations that you work in and what would lead somebody to contact you.
So often work calls when a adult child maybe who is not nearby or doesn't see their parents often goes home to visit and finds that although their parents had said everything's fine when they walked in, that maybe not everything is as fine as it looked. It might be that there are dishes piling up, the house isn't as well kept as it used to be, Mom and dad seem more tired. There's not a lot of food in the fridge, or there's expired food. There may be medications sort of scattered all over the place. It doesn't look like there's any organized way. Maybe the mom or dad hasn't showered in a while. Mail piling up is another one of those things. So often in that situation, people will call us and say, I don't know, I think something's going on. What should we do? The other times when people call us are if there's a new diagnosis, and that might be some sort of a dementia or some other chronic life limiting sort of illness that's progressive, like Parkinson's, ALS, even congestive heart failure, diabetes. Sometimes that becomes harder to manage. It can be anything that's starting to have an impact on the elder's ability to function. The earlier people call us, often the better, because we can intervene earlier. The other times that we get called are when there's a crisis. Mom's been taking care of dad and she has a fall and breaks her hip. So one, what do you do to support mom? But also, who's going to take care of dad? So we'll get called in that case to bring in supports and create a plan that's supportive of both parents. Or maybe mom falls and she's alone. Or auntie, your aunt or your uncle who never married, who doesn't have kids, they might also start having health issues that make it more difficult to live independently. And we might get called in that kind of situation as well.
And then, so talk to me about some of the services that you provide. What are some of the things that you can come in and do? And I've heard from you about services I didn't even know were available. So what are some of the things that you and your team can help provide and support people with?
So often the basic aging life care management, or ongoing care management, is the care manager will come in and do an assessment, a general assessment of someone's well-being. They'll look at their health, their mental health, cognitive health, what their medical diagnoses are, what their formal supports are. Do they have someone that helps them shower? Or are they doing that on their own? Can they do that on their own? Look at paperwork, make sure that they have the right paperwork in place, things like a healthcare proxy, power of attorney, and that that the paperwork is up to date and that it makes sense. We also will look at how they spend their days, about their social and their social engagement. And then we'll create a plan. And it might be, we really need to get their health under better control. So how about if we go with them to medical appointments so we can hear what the doctor's recommending, what medications they should be on, and when, and help them set up a system, whether that's a medication machine, just a med box, someone helping them with reminders, pre-filled medications to make sure they're taking their medications right, and have all the proper diagnoses. So we might do that. If they need someone, it turns out that they haven't showered in 6 months because they're afraid to go in because they're afraid they're going to fall. We will connect them with a home care agency or some other sort of aide who can help provide that support. We work with many of them, so whenever we're recommending them or connecting people, they're vetted agencies who we trust. We know the type of work, and we really will look at a best fit for the person, whether that's frequency and if they have minimum hours or not. We'll do that. If it's that, we really need to be moving someplace else. This isn't going to work anymore. I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. Everything that I use other than my kitchen is upstairs, and I'm not going to be able to get upstairs anymore. We'd help look at that, whether that's adding a chairlift so they can get upstairs, or whether that's finding a different place for them to live, like maybe an assisted living community or an independent living community, or making other modifications in the home to make it work for how they envision their life. We also have what we call thoughtful engagement specialists. And their role is really to bring companionship, joy, purpose, and meaning into people's lives. One of the things that we really have learned post-COVID, and I think we kind of knew before, but now we've studied it more, we've seen the impact of the isolation from COVID, is that not being isolated, being socially engaged, taking part in activities that are meaningful to you have a huge impact on health, cognitive, and mental health identifiers, factors. So it's really important to have that. And our thoughtful engagement specialists are not someone who's going to say, hey, let's go to bingo. They're going to dig down in their initial assessment and find out what's really important to you and what you love and figure out ways to do that, even if there are limitations, either physical or cognitive, and they'll find a way to do that. A great example is we had a client who was bedbound in an assisted living, who had been a home ec teacher, and she had 4 kids, and entertaining her friends when they were young, their friends when she was younger. And she and her husband had a monthly cocktail party at their house. And she just loved cooking and entertaining, despite the fact that she was living in assisted living in memory care bedbound. Our thoughtful engagement specialist was able to figure out how to cook with her and to entertain. She'd cook and they'd smell things. And then the aides would come in who worked there and she'd get to entertain again. And these were her recipes. She'd give to the thoughtful engagement specialist who would go and get the ingredients, they'd cook it. And then they wrote them down to create a legacy cookbook for her children. And it was really amazing because she was bedbound in large part out of fear. And this joy that she found from this engagement actually spread beyond when the thoughtful engagement specialist was there. And she started on occasion being willing to get up and go into the dining room for her meals and also to go for some music activities where she had been completely isolated and refusing to go out of her room prior to that. So that's one example. Another example, and this was one, and it's really an example of how our specialist really digs in and finds what's important. I had made the referral. I thought the person was missing being out in nature based on the conversation I had had. Well, when she went in there, she found what the person was really missing was giving back to the community. So for a year and a half, I think, they've been together now 2.5 years, a year and a half, this woman who has dementia that's advanced enough that she can't drive and she's difficulty engaging with people, delivered Meals on Wheels. She was able to carry the bags and the meals, knock on the door, say hello, make a little small talk, and deliver people their meals. And she felt that she was still giving back, which was really meaningful to her. A third service that we have are care manager assistants, and they're very much like high-level companions, but they do more observation. They kind of work under a care plan that has been set out by the care managers, and we'll keep an eye. They're an extra set of eyes and ears for the family or for the care managers in terms of they see them often weekly or a couple times a week. They notice changes very early. During COVID, they were considered essential employees, so they were able to go in when care managers were not allowed to go in and see our clients. So they were able to, we avoided, I would say, a couple hospitalizations for urinary tract infections because they were able to go in and notice really early some of the small changes in their person. And get meds ordered so there was no hospitalization, which is, especially during COVID, was a big win. But in general, with older people, it's a pretty big win to avoid hospitals.
So we have engaged with you with various clients, and I think that thing that is so impactful from my perspective, and we're looking at this from the financial perspective, but looking at the person and seeing where help is needed, because either the individual is unable to perform whatever it is that they need care for, but also the family. So the family is having to step in. So I've seen it help the family tremendously. So we've got working children who maybe have children of their own and they're in that sandwich generation, or just maybe family members that aren't close by. And it's given them boots on the ground and eyes on the situation that they didn't have before. And I know that's invaluable. But I think the other thing that is a huge component of all this is understanding what services and what support is available, whether it's looking around the house and seeing what needs to be corrected or changed to give them better mobility, or whether it's, oh, there are people who do X that your family needs. I think that those are really, really critical. So talk for a minute about what are changes that families tend to dismiss that should actually be addressed that you see. That if you could give people advice and some warnings, what would you tell them?
So I think that some of them I mentioned already. Things like the home not being as well kept as it usually was, or the hygiene not being the same, fewer showers, hair not being taken care of the way it was, uh, mail piling up is often one of the very first signs, because and the concern about that also often means that they're not looking at their bills. They're not paying their bills and keeping up with those sorts of things. Um, as people age, particularly if they're going through some cognitive decline, the multitask, higher thought activities that need executive function, which is our ability to know what needs to be done, break things down into steps and do it, is one of the first things that starts to decline. So opening mail, knowing whether it's real or whether it's spam, knowing how to pay the bill, all of that is multi-step and is likely to start declining before you maybe even see any other issues. Another would be if they're losing weight, if it's not, if you ask them and they say, oh, gee, yeah, I went on a diet and I haven't, I've been cut my calories in half and I'm walking more. That's one story. But if you're noticing that they're losing weight and they're not doing that purposefully, that would be another thing really to look into a little bit. Does that mean that they're not able to manage the complex task of planning a meal, going to the store, getting the food, cooking the food, and eating it? Do they forget to eat? Or sometimes that's a first sign of some medical issues that are happening. I would say that on the other side, if they look much puffier, if they've gained a lot of weight, or there seems to be a lot of fluid retention, that would be another thing maybe to pay attention to, and just ask that question of when was the last time you saw your doctor? Some of these things are pretty easy interventions, a different medication, a tweak of a dose. But because the people are living with it day to day, they may not even notice that it's happening. Or there's a ton of denial, and older people just a lot of people assume it's part of getting older, which it may or may not be. So it's always worth asking the question, seeing a doctor to ask that question.
It sounds like also that what you can do for families is sort of broker some conversations maybe between the children and the parents. So talk to us a little bit about that and the role that you can play to help them. Because I've seen in families that we work with, the roles are firmly established. The parents are in charge, the children are not. And that sometimes doesn't, because it doesn't change, it can create a lot of friction. So talk to us a little bit about how you can intervene and help broker some of these conversations.
Sure. Um, That is absolutely some of what we do. It's often one of the harder pieces of what we do, because adult children are often really want to be very respectful of their parents, and they should be. So they don't want to point out that their parents are failing, or they're not cleaning, or they're not eating right, all of those things. So that can be a difficult subject to broach, not to mention nobody wants to be reminded of where they're failing. So the way that we often help is, one, we're professionals. We can be brought in as professionals. Much of the older generation was brought up that a professional knew everything. You didn't question a doctor, although we will question a doctor for your parents or for you or whoever we're advocating for. But there is a culture of, we don't ask questions, we don't question the doctors. And I've just lost my train of thought. So we help with that. We get in there and we form a relationship with whoever our client is. And we begin to understand what's really important to them. And we have the conversations with them from that standpoint. I know you really, really loved to play golf. You haven't been in a while. Why is that? Do you miss it? Yeah, I miss it, but I can't play anymore because my back is killing me all the time. Well, I wonder if there's something we could do to help your back. Maybe if you didn't have to lift your wife in and out of bed all the time, if there were an easier way to do that, someone could help you with that. Maybe that would work. Those kinds of conversations. Sometimes I'll admit, and I usually tell the kids this, that and when I say kids, it's not always kids. Sometimes it's a niece or a nephew or a best friend or a life partner, anybody who sees someone else that needs support and needs support supporting them, we can work with and help. But so I'll say, I'm going to throw you guys under the bus. So driving, if you start hearing that mom got lost on her way home, or she keeps telling you that she bumped into this and her car got dinged by that and this happened, that should raise a red flag. Nobody wants to tell someone that they can't drive anymore. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll work with the supporting family to bring it up. And then what I'll do is say, you know what? There are these things, there are OT assessments. We can go and they'll tell us whether you can still drive. They're not going to get off your back until we have someone officially tell us. So let's just do that and prove them wrong. And then we'll go to the OT and see what happens. But by then, often, if the person really isn't safe to drive, once you go through that assessment, which an aging life care manager can set up, they've lost their license anyway. But it's not the family or the kids who have taken away the keys.
And it's not they got into an accident and hurt themselves
and
or
hurt
something. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you talked before about diagnoses, and that's an important part of the care. And I think another really important piece about what you do is prepare the family and the individuals for what's coming. So talk to us about how you prepare families for progressive conditions like dementia, Parkinson's, or some kind of chronic illness. What do you do for them and the family? How can you help them?
Often it's a lot of education, just talking to people about what can be anticipated, or talking them through what they're seeing. Is this a function of the diagnosis, or is this something else? So thinking that through, and just preparing people for, well, with this illness, in most cases, I mean, we're not soothsayers, so we're basing it on our experience and knowledge of the illnesses. This is the likely scenario. There is going to be a point where walking is going to get more difficult and going upstairs may be not possible anymore. So let's think about, we don't have to do anything about it now, but let's think about how important is it staying in this home. So if it's really important to stay in this house and there's no way to bring everything downstairs that's going to be needed, that would be one option. Another option might be, as I mentioned earlier, adding a stair lift to get upstairs. Or it may just not be possible to stay anymore. So what are the options if you don't stay? Well, you definitely don't want to go to an assisted living or some kind of community. You don't like being around people that much, or whatever that scenario might look like. We would then think about, well, how can we get a first floor or a one floor kind of community? And this is where we really work in a team with people like Deb and financial planners and elder law attorneys and things like that, where we're looking at the sustainability of a plan as well, which is really important. We try to, without necessarily needing to know the nitty gritty of costs, of not of costs, of what they have in the bank account, we will offer what the general costs are going to look like for the different options. And then working with the financial planner, elder law attorney to look at asset protection and things like that. We look at what's sustainable. As people get closer to the end of life, or even before that, really, for me, the important part is helping them to identify what they want their life to look like. And I think this is true for the older folks, like, so we're thinking sandwich generation. This is true for the older people who need care, but also for the people who are providing the care. Because the earlier you start with some of those plannings and identifying, you can make choices along the way to support the life you would like to have. So again, backing up to the older folks, it might be having conversations early on about how you define quality of life. There are some people for whom, if they can't communicate somehow, they need, even if it's just writing on a notepad, that's enough communication for them. For some people, they need to be verbally able to communicate. Some people don't care if they can communicate as long as they can sit in a chair and are not in bed all day. Some people, I had a client for whom drinking plain thin water was quality of life for her. And when she started having swallowing difficulties and they wanted to put a thickening agent in, she said to me, if I have to drink this stuff for the rest of my life, that's not quality of life. So we talked about it a little bit more, and we brought in her healthcare proxy, who in this case happened to be a cousin, who was a relatively distant cousin, but this woman had never married, never had kids. So the cousin was the closest person that she had when she was making out her healthcare proxy, talking to her about the value of allowing her cousin to have the quality of life that she wanted and eat and drink what she wanted, even if it meant shortening the number of days on earth that she had, because that was what had been expressed was important to her. My cousin was able to do that. So we, against doctor's recommendations, I would say, allowed my client to eat and drink as she wished. And she had her beer and her clear water and her cake, and really had a number of nice months after that. My guess is probably if she wasn't doing that, she wouldn't have gotten pneumonia later on and passed away from the pneumonia. But that was really her choice. And so we really try to support that as much as possible. And we will talk with families and our clients about things. In Massachusetts, there's a MOLST. Probably some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't. It's a Massachusetts Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment.
So MOLST.
Yes.
Form, yeah.
Yeah, most. And it asks about, do you want CPR? Do you want to be intubated? Do you want dialysis? Do you want artificial nutrition and artificial hydration? So I will often go through each of those questions with my client and their healthcare proxy or whoever, um, and explain what each of those things will look like. So, for example, for a frail elder, contrary to what you see on TV, CPR is probably going to break ribs and probably puncture a lung. Very painful, slow recovery for someone who's older. And again, contrary to what you see in TV and movies, people don't pop open their eyes when their heart comes back and start talking and be right at their baseline. Often their baseline is lower than it was before the event that happened. And often it won't even come back up. So we talk about that. We talk about success rates of CPR, intubation. Often when people are elderly, if they get intubated, they often can't come off that intubation. The tube never leaves. They can never talk again. So for example, the person that I said being able to communicate verbally is crucial. He's not going to want to have a tube. So helping people think through that and having them talk to their decision makers, their family, their loved one, everybody in sight, although it's never a comfortable conversation, but for people to understand what they define as quality of life helps later on when somebody is called into the position of having to make those decisions. Because you can go back to the conversation of this is quality of life. This is what's really important to this person. And if I have them intubated, they're not going to be able to do that thing that's really important to them. So I'm not going to do that.
So having those conversations and helping people to articulate decisions and talk about what they value is a really critical piece of this. And I think that most children, I think that the biggest component of aging that I see is that people have no experience with this. So that working with somebody like you is really critical because you've seen it in so many different ways and a myriad of different circumstances. And that really helps people to understand, both children and aged adults, what's happening, what can happen, and what they should prepare for. So I think of that as being hugely, hugely useful. I want to shift to people preparing themselves for aging. And what are some of the things that they should be doing now to prepare for aging successfully? And what kinds of aspects of their life and self-care should they be thinking about?
Okay, it's a great question. And the fact is, in my mind, wherever you are in the aging process, you should be thinking about these things. Because any of us is one diagnosis, one accident away of being needing help, needing extra help or care, or needing crisis intervention, things like that. So one of the first is what I've talked about also with the aging is, what do you want your life to look like? So what do you want your retired life to look like, say? Are you planning to travel a lot or go hiking? And then there are a lot of things that you can do in preparing for that to help increase the chance that you will be in shape to do your hikes or to do your traveling. So things, some of them are just the basic things that we hear all the time, but they really make a difference. Eating well, sleeping well, exercising, having regular screening, at the, colonoscopies, mammograms, things like that, trying to keep your health under control or in the best control it can be. The eating well, sleeping, social engagement also, even as we're younger, is really important. All of those things really help with brain function and ultimately brain function is one of the most important pieces of being able to live a quality, fulfilled life. The other piece that I think is really important is making sure you have your paperwork done. So that includes, I
Yeah, I
know,
was going to say, this is something that we work on as well with our clients. So the estate planning documents are super important. The healthcare proxy and the durable power of attorney are super important. And then I think, so I want to hear specifically which other ones are needed, but I also think it's really important to prepare your appointees for, they need to know what they've been appointed to, and they need to understand what the role involves. So I think that's also an important conversation. But tell us above and beyond that, what people should have in place.
so first I want to go back to just the basics. One of the things that I encourage people to do is don't consider it one and done. Revisit it periodically. I don't know whether you have people do that or not routinely, but
Yeah,
revisit
we go over it every year and
that.
then regularly. So for durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy, those are constantly being updated and changing with the times. So making sure that those are, fresh within the last 7 years, but really that the appointments are correct.
Exactly. I have had the experience where I'm told by family or a client, oh yeah, I have all that paperwork. And then when I look at the actual appointees, the number one is, I'll be talking to the caretaker. The number one appointee for making healthcare decisions is the spouse, which is really why I was called in, because they have advanced dementia. So they're not really going to be a good decision maker for their caretaker. And then the other one is the sister who passed away 2 years ago. And so there really isn't anyone there. So really looking at those frequently. And as Deb said, also making sure that the appointees know that they're the appointees. There are certainly times where we have called people and they said, I had no idea I was a healthcare proxy. Making sure they know what your values are, what quality of life is to you, what you do or do not want, and having those conversations frequently, because as you age, your opinions about things are likely to change. So
Shocker.
yeah, yeah. So all of that. And then other things. So the most, which I talked about, often doctors will say, that's really only for older people. I think that it's good to have it anyway, because what it is, it's usually a bright pink form, but now you can do it on regular paper. People put it on their refrigerator. EMTs are trained to look for that, and they will follow what's on that. So if you know that you do not want CPR ever, you put that up there, and you're not going to be in the position where they've tried to resuscitate you and they've gotten you about halfway there. So you're resuscitated, but you're very limited now. You've lost speech or something like that. So that's one of the things. Another, with that, I often encourage people, and people should have these in general, their doctor's names, a list of doctor's names and phone numbers. Important contacts, so who their healthcare proxy is, that phone number, who their power of attorney is, that phone number. If there are other people who are maybe boots on the ground, if your child lives in California and she's healthcare proxy, but you're here in Massachusetts, then there's probably someone else in your life, whether it's the aging life care manager, your best friend, your uncle, your cousin, who's the person who might meet you at the hospital or might pick you up or drive you to a doctor's appointment. Have those people listed also. Have any medical diagnoses that you have listed on that, or medical record number at your primary care or at the hospital you usually go to, so people can get your medical history, your medication list, a list of allergies. All of those things can help expedite care and avoid errors. They're not going to give you the medication that makes you hallucinate or that makes you throw up all the time. If they know that those things don't work for you and that they cause issues.
So
Um,
it sounds like people should be downloading this form and at least going through it and putting it together and having those conversations,
yes, absolutely.
whether it's with their kids or
Right,
their best friend or whomever.
right, absolutely. And there's actually a form that I think you can find online that's often referred to as the file of life. And that has queuing for all of these, meds and diagnoses and doctors and contact information, or you can just print it up. You can print it up. Often what I'll suggest to people is either put it, if they do have a mold, particularly on pink paper, put it on their fridge behind it, or put an envelope on your fridge that says emergency information and put it on the fridge. So if something happens and an emergency team comes in, they'll know to look for it and grab it and bring it with them.
So, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when planning for themselves by either obviously not planning, but or just dealing with it later? So, talk to us about some of the mistakes that are made or the opportunities that people miss that they could capture.
That is a kind of tricky question. Excuse me. Um, but I would say that if you don't plan a little bit ahead and know what you want your life to look like, or you just ignore symptoms and let things go, it's more complex to heal something. I don't often people are told if they've had a surgery and they need pain meds, they're told not to be shy, to try and for the first 24, 48 hours, stay ahead of the pain. So keep taking the meds instead of letting the pain break through. It's easier to fix small things or keep things fixed than have a crisis and then try to fix it. So you're thinking about a hip injury or a hip fracture often can be a major changing point for people where either there's a surgery or they're just in pain or just they become more limited over time. So things you can do to protect yourself, make sure that you're doing weight bearing exercise to keep your bones as strong as possible, do exercise, balance, strength training, things like that, all of which allow you, if you start to lose your balance, give you a higher likelihood of being able to right yourself and avoid the fall. Obviously, not everything can be avoided, but taking care of things and keeping your body in its best health or in the best health possible are something that will help you in the long run. One of the other things that I often think about that's related to all of this is essentially preventive medicine. So, as I said earlier, colonoscopies, your mammograms, but knowing your family's medical history. So, for example, if there's a lot of breast cancer in your family, think about, do you want to do one of the tests for like the BRCA1 or whatever that testing is, the genetic testing, to see how at risk you are? And do you want to do something to try to lower your risk? There are people who will have elective mastectomies or will have their uterus or something like that taken out to avoid the risk of developing a cancer. That's also, even for cognitive changes now, I don't think they're mass market, but for Alzheimer's, they're getting very, very close to being able to do blood testing with biomarkers to look for the risk factor. There are other genetic kinds of illnesses that you can test for and look at, and then choose preventative actions, whether it's through your diet and exercise or a surgery or preventative medicine that helps keep your body in the best shape it can be in and keeps your brain in the best shape. I went off on a tangent. I apologize.
Um, so some of the things that we help people with, we obviously, you mentioned it before, the forecasting piece, helping people understand what's affordable. And um, we also look for supportive care. Can you self-insure? Can you take care of all these upcoming expenses? Because can become a very expensive part of your life. And there are ways to mitigate that with long-term care and things like that. So we help people prepare for all of that. But talk about just the living situation and options that people have and some of the things they can plan or prepare for, like, am I staying at home or am I going to a continuing care? Those kinds of things. Talk about that and how that fits into the overall plan.
So again, I think people's opinions change over time as their statuses change, but a general sense of, I think probably when I can't stay alone, I'm going to want to live in a community where there are services, and maybe it will be a continuing care community or a community where there's independent living, but then you can add on another level and it can be assisted living. Um, Having some idea of the cost of those things and planning for those things allows you to make other kinds of choices. Um, you know, it, I'm not suggesting that people deprive themselves of meaningful things, but it might be, gee, if I only do 2 vacations a year instead of 6, I can still get my travel bug in, but I also can create some savings to pay for assisted living or community. One of the things people often don't know is that Medicare and Medicaid do not pay for private home care. They do not pay for long-term skilled nursing care. And they, at least in Massachusetts, some of the states are a little bit different, and they do not pay for assisted living. So that's all, those are all out of pocket expenses. Even though the places may sound like they're medical, assisted living is a social model. It's not really a medical model. And so it's not paid for. Long-term care insurance, it has changed over the years, but I still think it's often a good planning feature so that they can help cover some of these expenses. In order to get onto Medicaid, which will cover long-term care in a nursing home, you have to bring down your assets. Currently, it's $2,000. So it's really low. There are ways through financial planning and also working with an elder law attorney who specializes maybe in Medicaid or has some Medicaid experience. There are ways to preserve some of those assets for care later on while still applying for Medicaid. But all of these things are things to think about rather than all of a sudden realizing that you don't quite qualify for Medicaid because you haven't spent down enough, but someone needs to go into a nursing home right now. And in assets, you only have enough for a month and a half. So what do you do then? We can help with that kind of planning and thinking that through as well. But these are all things to be thinking about.
Well, and having gone through parental care myself with my parents, I think it's really important to understand that as we're shopping for the right facility or care or things like that, again, we don't have the experience. We, the children, typically, and the adults, the elder adults, don't have the experience to be able to evaluate a couple of things. One, what's coming down the line in terms of care needs. And two, what types of facilities provide what? And what are we missing? Because when I went to look at facilities, we could see Well, it seems like it might be well organized and the people are well dressed. And we had a lunch in the dining room and the food tasted good. And that's really, other than the decor, that's about all you can tell from those things. So enrolling somebody like you at that phase, I think can also be really important.
Right.
Um, I want to talk about what kinds of support. So there are people who have few friends, they don't have family, they never had children. What can they do to replace that traditional caregiver experience? And what can they do to help themselves have a successful aging process?
So often that's a good time for someone to work with an aging life care manager to bring someone on board. Um, because we function often as family or like family. I have a there's a client that recently called and she said she needed a co-pilot. And I loved that expression because that's really what we do is we will walk through life, whatever it looks like, with people. Um, and some of the things about, you know, not having much of a community. So maybe that's the time that you do look at moving into either an assisted living or an independent living or over 55 community where there are more people around who tend to be often in similar um, life stages and maybe are looking for more support, more friends. There's the Mahjong Club and the Bridge Club and the Dull Men's Club that all happen at the clubhouse or wherever. So there are ways to create some community in that. There are a lot of support groups out there, both virtual and in person, and there are many that are related to a specific diagnosis or to being a solo ager or to being a caretaker, any of those things. That's always a great place. I've had a number of clients who started a support group and then really created a really nice support group for themselves that bolstered their ability to take care of their loved one. So those are things that you can do. But again, I think for someone who's relatively alone in life, really creating that team around them of maybe a financial planner, elder law attorney, aging life care professional, there may be a therapist that might be involved or some other sort of support person. To the church or their temple.
That's great. One last question. I'm going to put up our contact information here as well. And one last question that I have is related to end of life and what is a successful end of life? What can it look like? And who are some of the people who might be involved in that? How would you help people with that?
So end of life, and there are people who will disagree with me. I think it can be a very peaceful and sacred time. It can be planned for by having conversations. There are people now who are called end of life doulas, much like a birth doula, but they will accompany somebody through the end of life. And that can be a lot of conversation. It can be talking about setting the scene. Do you want a lot of people around you or do you want to be by yourself? Do you want bright lights and a lot of music? Do you want candlelight and fresh air? So all of those things that are going to bring the person who is dying peace can be planned to some extent in advance. An end of life doula is a great way to do that. An aging life care manager often, because we do it so often, can help with that. And the other is hospice. Hospice is a great service. People tend to wait too long to ask for hospice or to enroll in hospice because they're afraid of what it means or they're afraid of death or dying. So I really encourage people. It's a support. It's paid by Medicaid, Medicare. You get a nurse who will visit depending on your needs, even every day. Their focus is on comfort and quality of life. So they'll make sure that if you don't want to be in pain, you will not be in pain. They help work with that. Some of them have music therapists and pet therapists and chaplains and social workers, and just a lot of support both for the individual who's dying and for the family to walk people through the experience and have it not be something that you're afraid of. Your body knows how to die if you let it. Often what we do that makes pain and difficulty is that we're fighting what our body is doing naturally.
That's great. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and helping us to see what's available. I think it's so compelling to understand what's available to help and support people. And, having somebody like you on the family team, whether it's for the aging parents or whether it's for the adult children, it can make such a huge difference. And being able to talk about what's needed and what is not understood yet. So thank you so much for sharing. And if people want to get in touch with you, we've got your email and contact information down here. And thanks again for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this. So if anybody wants to be in touch, please reach out.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.